Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to an episode of the Cinemacast podcast season 2. If you guys have yet to do so when you first came in, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below, guys. Show support and love for the channel and the links to our streaming, our social medias, Discord, merch store, everything you guys want to check out. Everything is down below in the description section. You can find everything there. Thank you guys for supporting us today. Let's get into today's episode. Today's topic here at the cinema. This is a movie that came out a year ago. This was one that I don't know if I was anticipating very much to come out and be a very hyped up film, a very good film indeed. But of course, reading here on Rotten Tomatoes, this game has a 65% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But the film was nominated for Best Adaptation at the Game Awards 2023. And yes, this movie today, Gran Turismo, is based not just on the video game, but also based on a true story as well. So, So, of course, if you guys are not familiar with video games, racing games, and such, if it's not your thing, Gran Turismo came out back in 1997, 1998 for the Sony PlayStation. This game is a Sony exclusive. It has been exclusive to all platforms of PlayStation since the mid to late 90s, and this has been considered one of the best racing simulations or simulators on the PlayStation. Notice how when you play this game, when you get into this game, they don't really call it a racing game. Okay, you've got tons of racing games out there for all different console platforms and PCs. And of course, back then we had a ton of them, like Top Gear, Ridge Racer, all that good stuff. Even, Mario Kart on Nintendo 64 was even popular too. But you had so many good titles. Even NASCAR had their finger and had their hand in a cookie jar with it a few times. But this game was supposed to introduce gamers to the realism of racing simulation, of how vehicles on a racetrack sound, how they feel, how they handle everything. This is like if you want to be a race car driver in your life, but you just, it was just a dream. A lot of kids grow up, we all have had dreams. We have dreams of being musicians, being actors, being artists, some being race car drivers. And I do gotta say, like, race car driving is probably it's probably one of the most dangerous professions out there that anybody could pick out of anything else to be. Football players, what happens to a football player? You get on the field, you run around, you tackle a bunch of men. What do? You sprain an ankle, you break a bone, whatever. You're out for a game or two, or you're out for a season, whatever. But you get into something that is considered a sport to most, such as racing. And it doesn't matter what type of racing it is. Racing can be considered dangerous in most perspectives. You're driving a 2-ton automobile. That's metal, plastic, fiberglass, whatever else goes into a vehicle. And it's going down a track or it's going down a road at top speeds, well over 100 miles an hour, depending on the tuning of your vehicle. If you're somebody who drives a race car with a real souped up engine and all kind of different components going into it and shit, and you're like, oh, if I hit the NOS button like in the Fast and the Furious, my car can topple up over to 201 miles an hour. Still, you're in a fucking death trap. You are in a death trap at this point. So just the slightest ass hair of a move or a mistake that is made can cost you your life when it comes to racing. And a lot of people see it as a a pretty cool profession. You're like, yeah, I'm a race car driver. I drive some of the most hottest and exotic muscle machines out there. Like, what type of car are you into? Are you into exotics? Are you into fancy vehicles? Are you into muscle? See, somebody like me, I've never been a car guy. I've never really never been a vehicle guy, a car guy, that kind of thing. Yes, I drive. Yes, I have a license and all. But to me, at my age, it's just considered four wheels and a seat. That's all it is. That's all I'm looking for is four wheels and a seat. I'm not looking for a Grand Ferrari or Lamborghini or maybe a fucking 1969 or 70 Dodge Charger or something like that. Now, my brother, he has a 1980 something, I think it's an 88 or 89 Dodge New Yorker. Now, if you look that up, people are probably like, it's not that great. Well, my brother, he's into classic cars. And that's one thing that I don't fancy as a hobby, but I'm just somebody who's like, I do admire classic cars. If I see something that's like a Bel Air, even though it's not a Plymouth Fury like Christine, but I still appreciate certain cars that are beauties, of a beautiful nature. People take good care of certain vehicles and all. But then, a vehicle it's a machine that gets you from point A to point B. That's all it is. And to turn it into a profession, where people use them in sporting events, they race for pink slips, they race for money, whatever. But it's still considered one of the most dangerous professions out there. And I will say, if you are somebody who takes into the profession of race car driving, take precaution and be careful out there, because this is something, people live for the need for speed. Oh, another name, the Need for Speed, which is another racing title on video game consoles. And of course, it did have its own adaptation movie just a few years ago. I have not seen it, but I think it falls along the lines with how the Need for Speed games nowadays have a storyline to it, and they've had storylines to them since the days of Need for Speed Underground and such, and it's been a big hit. Usually, I just go with a game if it's open world, if it has races and stuff, if it looks pretty cool, if you can customize your vehicle. That's my thing. That's what I love about games like the Need for Speed Underground 2. Now, with Gran Turismo, and when you look at a name like that, it's a racing game. How can you turn a racing game into a film adaptation? And we've been asking these questions for the last 31 years, people. One of the very first video game adaptations to come out was Super Mario Brothers. Now, personally for me, I do enjoy the movie. Yes, it's cheesy. It's not the best. It's not that great of a movie. Even the actors, Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo, they had to be drunk. They had to drink on the set just to make it through a days of work. Even Dennis Hopper, he wasn't too thrilled on the set with the movie. They made it though. It came out in theaters. I mean, whether you liked it or hate it, I found it kind of enjoyable. It's underrated in a sense. It is like I said, it is very cheesy, but since then, there's been video game adaptation movies that have come out over the course of 30 years. Different video games that were adapted to movie, full-length live-action movies like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Tomb Raider quite a few times. I think even some went to animation too, CG like Ratchet and Clank and all. Resident Evil has had many adaptations and many sequels and such. Silent Hill, Double Dragon even came out back in the 90s, of course. I think Wing Commander was another one of those. Rampage. I don't see how the game Rampage was turned into a movie, but it was, and it has The Rock in it. Speaking of The Rock, Doom, which to me, Doom is very underrated. I like Doom for what it was, but the only thing that killed it for me was The Rock. And that was at the high point where The Rock was starting to get into a lot more Hollywood motion pictures. He was going between Hollywood and the WWE, and he was getting a lot of these roles. And of course, Doom was one of them. And I feel like he should have never been in that role. But It is what it is. It's another underrated one for me as well. But then you look at a movie like this, Gran Turismo. Now you got to figure, how is this movie based on a true story? Does it talk about the video game itself? I mean, does it talk about? Is it like a documentary or whatever? It's considered a biographical sports drama film. And of course, this movie stars David Harbour and Orlando Bloom in it. And if you don't know who David Harbour is, he was in a few films that are, whether you missed him in there or you don't know who he is. A lot of people will recognize him from Stranger Things, I believe. But this movie in particular is based on a story involving this young guy, this kid, this teenager. And he goes by the name John Martinborough. He's played by Archie Madekwe. I guess that's how you pronounce his name, Madekwe. He plays a young retail worker and who's also a fan of the Gran Turismo video games, aspiring to become a professional racer. Now, that's pretty much the theme for this whole movie. Now, this movie was based on a true story, and I have looked it up on to the whim. Now, usually when you watch movies that are based on true stories or true events, they're not necessarily 100% based. They're not 100% based on an event or a story. They put at least maybe 80 to 85% of the material that has actually happened, put it into the movie, and then they just add a little bit of this and this and that, something that has not happened, but maybe to spice it up a little bit. I understand the purpose of that. Like, if you're going to do a movie that's kind of based on an event, you want to try to get as much facts as you can from everything. But with this movie, you got this guy who's played by Orlando Bloom, and he's pitching this idea. Following a pitch by marketing executive, his name is Danny, for Nissan. He establishes this organization or group called the GT Academy, which is recruiting skilled players of the racing simulator Gran Turismo in order to turn them into real-life race car drivers. And of course, he recruits this guy, Jack Salter, who is played by David Harbour, in order to train these recruits. Now, that's basically what the movie's all about. That's all it is. So you got a story where you got this young kid, this teenage boy, whose dream ever since he was a kid was to become a race car driver. And he spends every day of his life, every single game of Gran Turismo he's played, he's gotten better and better at it. He's learned all the curves. He's learned all the moves. He's learned the corners. He's learned this and that, all the way up until the most recent game that came out on PS4, which was Gran Turismo Sport. And he's learned everything. He's played online. He's set times, time trials and stuff against other players. And that's what this movie is basically showing, is you have this guy who's taking the top players of this game and establishing them into this GT Academy, recruiting them and telling them that, hey, basically, we are here to make your dreams come true. You want to be a race car driver? This is what we're here to do. We're going to train you to be race car drivers, but it's going to be a challenge. This is going to be a hard challenge. So, this group of kids, they are put through so many endurance tests throughout the first, I want to say, half hour to an hour of this movie. They're put through a lot of endurance tests. They're doing a lot of exercises, a lot of mental training, a lot of physical training, until it ends up with just one person who qualifies for these Grand Prix events. And he's got to set a record for at least 4 or 5 of them, I think it is. But he ends up making it, of course. And it turns out to be this young kid, Archie. So, with this movie, it just tells a story about this kid, and he does go through a couple of tragic couple of tragic events that are seen in the movie. One of which was he was racing down a track and his car just suddenly caught air and the car ended up flipping upside down and into the stands, pretty much injuring him, not too much, but basically it also did kill off a spectator on the track. So it kind of shut him off from racing. He didn't want to do it anymore. He wasn't comfortable with it. But this guy, Jack, he sees so much potential with this kid. He knows he can do it. So he shares a story with him later on in the film about a similar incident that happened to him. And he was able to convince this kid to get back into racing. So if you're up for 134 minutes of a bunch of kids racing cars, making mistakes, and you're not watching the entire race, you're watching segments of the race. But I feel like with this movie, where it comes in at is the character development when it comes to these actors coming together. Now, I did say, okay, Rotten Tomatoes. Now, everybody knows how I feel about Rotten Tomatoes. I don't give two shits. They gave it a 65%. However, audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, while those polled at Post-Track gave it a 90% overall positive score. So you can't always go by certain critics when it comes to movies like this, because they always want to shit on a movie that has so much potential going for it, and they just want to shut it down for no reason. For no reason. You know, these critics, I think they get paid off to try to shit down these movies that have so much potential to be good, and then people will go and read these articles and they're like, yeah, doesn't seem like my kind of movie. I'll go by what they say. Yeah, who gives a fuck about that actor anyway? So, Kristen Lopez from the Time Wrap went on to say about this movie, Gran Turismo works best because it eschews its video game origins quickly before settling into a standard race car film. It's unknown how fans of the game will respond to the movie. No one watching the movie and the Critics Theater pointed out a specific game Easter eggs, but on the whole, fans of race car films should be in for a good time. And that's what this movie is. I think this movie is for both fans of the franchise, for fans of, you know, the video game series, and for people who are looking for a movie that's, you know, it's about racing. You know, that's all it is. It's a good car film. It does not have the action that the Fast and the Furious or Gone in 60 Seconds has, or, you know, or any kind of movies like that. This is a story about somebody who is being put through training to become something that he's always dreamed about. You know, and he's got people that are looking down on him saying, you know, you can't do this, you ain't going to amount to it. And then you got people that in the end who's like, yeah, I was kind of worried about it, but now I'm proud of you. I'm glad you're doing it. That kind of thing, you know. So the character development throughout this movie, especially between the actors, you know, the actor who plays Archie and, of course, David Harbour, you know, their interaction in the movie, it really, I don't want to say it kind of pull some tear strings, but they do have a really good chemistry. It's a kind of chemistry in the film where the characters, they start out kind of sour at one another, where, you know, you have one character who is very negative about what's going on. You know, he's not too fond of the project. He thinks it's going to fail, but then he sees potential in one or two characters, especially the one particular character, who is the main character of the movie. You know, he finds heavy potential and he starts taking a liking to him. So there is this sense of trust that is being built between these two characters throughout the movie, and it is on a solid note. So no matter what happens, when one character messes up or the other character messes up, you know, there's nothing really too sour. There's no hatred or anything. There's just some misunderstandings going on. There's a lot of confusion going on, But these characters, they stay solid for each other. They continue this bond. It's a sweet moment. It's a really good bond between them, and it pushes its way through the story. It gets it played out so well. So if you sit there and you're like, oh, I don't see it as a video game based movie, as what's her name, Kristen Lopez said, works best because it eschews whatever the fuck word is. Its video game origins quickly before settling into a standard race car film, which is true, because when you see the title Gran Turismo and you're a fan of the game series or you've heard of it, you're expecting a game where it's like, okay, 3, 2, 1, go. You're watching this race go on and something happens. No, this is something completely different, and it definitely throws a curveball to you. It definitely threw a curveball to me because I did not know who this guy was. I did not know who John Martinborough was. I never heard of him. But then I read up on him and I say, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. This is somebody who has played the game series for a long time, been a fan of it, and he has been picked to be part of this event to become a race car driver. This was his dream, his lifelong dream, and it has come true. And then, of course, as I said, and then there's a criticism of the crash depiction in the film. Like, the film is widely criticized for its use of Martinborough's crash at the, I'm probably going to butcher this name, Nürburgring. It's one of the racetracks that is in the. It's one of those famous racetracks. It's one of the long racetracks in the world. One of the longest racetracks in the world, basically. This segment faithfully reenacted his 2015 crash, during which his Nissan GTR Nismo became airborne at a notorious Flugplatz turn and cartwheeled into the fence into spectators. One spectator was killed almost immediately, and others were taken to the hospital with serious and severe injuries. This crash was depicted in Gran Turismo as a traumatic event for Martinborough that impacted his racing performance during his debut at the 24-hour of Le Mans. In reality, the crash occurred roughly 2 years after his Le Mans debut, which is true. So there's a timeline difference between the movie and real life, but they almost got it down to the T, basically. They had to figure they had to get basically every aspect of this kid's life into this movie and make it a part of it. And why would they call it Gran Turismo? Well, I guess because that's where he started at. That's where he started out racing, was this video game, Gran Turismo. And what a pretty good story it was, because you got this kid who's played this game for so long. He gets picked for this event. Boom, he's a race car driver. Okay, now you got executives over at Columbia and Sony and all that. Like, hey, maybe what's a good idea? What's a good pitch for a video game movie? Oh, let's do Gran Turismo. Oh, how do you do that? Well, let's see. The production started in July 2013. When it was announced that Sony Pictures was developing a Gran Turismo film with Michael DeLuca and Danny Brunetti producing it, and a script by Alex Tse. In 2015, Joseph Kosinski, all these hard names I got to pronounce today, they were set to direct the film with a new screenplay by John and Eric Hober. And in 2018, the Kosinski version was no longer moving forward. It wasn't until May 2022 when it was announced that the film adaptation of Polyphony's digital Gran Turismo video game was in early development at Sony Pictures and PlayStation Productions. Shortly after, Neil Blomkamp was hired to direct a screenplay written by Jason Hall, and Sony was set a release date for August 11th, 2023. The lead roles were cast in September 2022 with David Harbour as a veteran race car driver who mentors Archie Madekwe as a teenage trainee, with the film being confirmed also as a biographical film based on a story of John Martinborough. So this movie really picked up in 2022, and it only took maybe a year to film. just about a year to film this movie. And they got it pretty much, spot on, with the story. If you want to go and look up the story on YouTube, if you want to read about it, in the biography online or wherever, you feel free, you can do that. But this movie, like I said, it's not just a standard racing movie. You're not going to go into this movie thinking it's going to be something like the Fast and Furious franchise or something, or high stakes, This is, I want to say it's like a soft tone version of Days of Thunder. If y'all remember Days of Thunder from the 90s with Tom Cruise, which was also a pretty good movie. That was that was based around NASCAR too. He was a NASCAR driver. This one, Days of Thunder wasn't based on any true story. It was pure fiction, but it was based around, NASCAR was the theme of the movie. Whereas with this one, it's not quite like that. Or you could probably think of it as like maybe the teenage version of Days of Thunder, but it's based around Gran Turismo, and it's got a really good story, with this actual teenager. I mean, he's probably in his 20s, maybe 30s by now. He's a professional racer. He's won a lot of races. He's been on the podium quite a few times. You guys can look him up. But I feel like this movie, it was a great move for Sony and for, even, PlayStation Productions. But, the people who put the screenplay together, who wrote the screenplay for it, who produced it and all, turning it into, just an amazing story. Just brought this story to life in a video game adaptation. Now, I'm pretty sure there's people probably out there that are like, they should have named it something else, but I feel like this was a proper name for it. It really was. It's not like your Tomb Raider or Resident Evil or Super Mario Brothers adaptations. This is basically a true story, but I will say this is probably going to be as best as you can get to adapting a racing game into a live action movie. And I give this movie, and I watched it twice. I watched it once with my fiance. She absolutely loved it. She really did. She had low expectations about this movie. I told her about it. I told her I was going to watch it with her. She went into it with low expectations. She didn't think she was going to like it, but she ended up loving it. This movie does have heart. It's really good. You guys have to go see this. Gran Turismo. I give this movie a 9.5 out of 10 on today's episode of Cinemacast. Very good movie. And that will conclude today's episode of Cinemacast, guys. Thank you for joining me today for today's episode talking about Gran Turismo. Today's episode of Cinemacast is brought to you by Dubby Energy Blend. If you guys are looking for a energy blend or energy drink that is being sponsored by gamers and streamers alike on Twitch, Kick, and such, we are a proud sponsor of Dubby Energy Blend with more than 10 different flavors to choose from. Are you ready to try Dubby, guys? Go on over, visit dubby.gg today, use promo code ARROW, WAN, and you guys will save 10% on the products that you purchase over there today. Also, if you guys want to hit up our merch store products right down below in the description section, you guys can hit us up on there. Be sure to use promo code ARROWENT, and you guys will save 15% on that. Also, if you guys are just now joining in, this is all pre-recorded, but if you guys have made it to the end of the video, if you guys have not yet to do so, have not yet done so, I'm a loss of words today, guys. If you guys have not yet done so, hit that like and subscribe button down below. I am currently tired as I am filming this, as I am recording this, guys. So thank you for hanging there with me today, and can't wait till you guys see next week's review. I can't wait to see next week's review because I don't even know what it is, but we will see what happens next week, guys, on this next season of Cinemacast. Thank you guys for watching me today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until next time, we'll catch you right back here at the cinema.